Yeah. Iranians have decided not to participate in Egypt. The argument on their part was the foreign minister of Iran said that the United States has attacked us and they're threatening us a lot of sanctions on Iran. That's the reason we are not going to be there, but we are welcoming any sort of solution for Gaza. Do you see anything beyond that? What the foreign minister of Iran said in as the one of the main reasons that Iran didn't participate?
I think there's a security reason, given the role of the U.S. in assassinating Iran's top leaders, given the role of Israel in assassinating Iranians, putting yourself in a country like Egypt that may not be able to provide security, given that Israel attacked the Hamas negotiating team inside Qatar, it would have been absurd to enter a scenario like that. And also given Egypt's coordination with Israeli intelligence and Israeli security, given the amount of Mossad penetration in Egyptian society, I think it would have been a huge risk. Diplomatically, it would have, what would the point of it had been, given that the entire spectacle was geared to show the dominance of the US, and that the only reason that any country would be there would be to demonstrate their desire to still be within Washington's orbit and part of a transatlantic alliance. All the Arab states that were there depend on US aid, with especially Egypt. So Iran continued to demonstrate its independence from these hollow spectacles and from the unipolar vision that Washington seeks to project on the world by basically staying home. And that, I think, was the rational move. And I think that'll become clearer in the coming weeks as Trump refuses to exert leverage to actually make peace. And war begins to creep to Iran's doorstep, courtesy of Israel and Netanyahu.
The main issue with Gaza is their right to decide about their future. But that wasn't mentioned. That was not mentioned in the peace plan, in the so-called peace plan. The point number 19, it mentions that the United States considers the desire of Palestinians to have a state, nothing more than that. What is that the issue? Why have they decided to agree with the United States if there is no mention of the Palestinian state in that document?
I mean, Trump didn't even mention Palestinians in his Knesset speech. He didn't say, they've suffered enormously and you need to consider them as a people, like just as humans. He didn't say anything like that in the Knesset. They didn't exist. And then Mahmoud Abbas, what was the purpose of him being in Sharm el-Sheikh? I mean, his presence was completely diminished. And behind the scenes, he and the Palestinian Authority have been lobbying against the release of Marwan Barghouti, who would be the most unifying figure who Hamas has sought to release, even though he is not someone who has been friendly to or a member of Hamas, because he's a unifying figure with street credibility that transcends the factionalism of Palestinian politics, who could emerge as a figure to lead a unity government towards a kind of Palestinian state. So Abbas is participating with Israel and Trump in undermining this process just to maintain his gilded prison in Ramallah, the 5-star occupation. As far as the Palestinians, I mean, the issues of occupation and colonization were never addressed by Trump or by anyone in this entire charade. All that took place was a relief, a welcome relief to the killing and the release of 2,000 Palestinians, including 1,700 who were kidnapped by Israel inside the Gaza Strip since October 7th. And this may have been the best deal that could have been taken under the circumstances, given the preponderance of power that Israel has over the Western powers. But it doesn't address anything and doesn't move any closer towards a Palestinian state. So, I mean, we're set for more conflict.
Max, you wrote a piece. I'm not talking about you, your team, and your team wrote a piece on the Gray Zone News about the secret Israeli base being hit by Iranian strike during the 12-day war. And what do we know about what has happened in those days, considering this case?
Well, this was a report by Jack Paulson, who is an independent reporter who has emerged from the tech industry to expose the role of tech in collaborating with the military, the intelligence services, and with Israel, particularly Israel's Unit 8200, and has produced some of the most indispensable work on that subject over the past several years since he quit his job at Google, and Wyatt Reed, who's my colleague at the Gray Zone. And what they did was they managed to geolocate Site 81, which is a hyper-secretive de facto Israeli military base that provides command and control to the military intelligence apparatus of Israel. And it is nestled within the Hakiria complex, which is a large tower in North Tel Aviv off Menachem Begin Boulevard, right near the Azrieli shopping mall and Azrieli complex. And it's surrounded itself by a series of residential towers, as well as the Israeli Air Force headquarters. And I've written about this before, how this represents the ultimate human shielding of the central node of Israel's genocide machine and its Fortress of Zion bunker, where Netanyahu and his inner circle hide whenever there's retaliation for the wars that they launch across the region, most recently in June during the 12-day war. So on June 13th, in the midst of the 12-day war, targets near Hakiria were hit. One of them was the North Tower of the Da Vinci apartment complex, which is a residential tower built next to Hakiria, and it's just south of the Kanarit Israeli Air Force towers. And what Jack Paulson and Wyatt Reed determined was it was also above this underground military intelligence bunker, which is jointly administered by the US and Israeli militaries. And they used this through a collection of leaked emails from the Handala leaks, which contain the emails of top-level Israeli military and diplomatic officials, as well as public documents, Israeli news reports, and photographs, that one of the locations that was struck by Iranian ballistic missiles on June 13th was directly above Site 81. So I don't know if Iran knew that was the site. I don't know what they were targeting specifically other than Hakiria, but it struck directly above Site 81. And this is the significant part. Site 81 is located almost directly below or in the shadow of the Da Vinci towers. So what this means is a residential tower is being used to human shield one of the most sensitive, secretive aspects of Israel's military intelligence apparatus, command and control. And I think that's the takeaway from this piece. And just one other point or something to note is that a reporter from Fox News, Trey Yingst, showed up at the site of this strike or these series of ballistic missile strikes on June 13th. And there's footage of Israeli police pushing him away and demanding that he not film. Israel has since shielded this area further to prevent the public from filming it with high walls. And they've basically evacuated some of these areas. So there's an acknowledgement there that they don't want the public to know about this or the press to know about these areas. It's all sort of it remains under official censorship. But the Israelis can no longer claim that Iran is trying to kill Israeli civilians when this was clearly a military target.
What's the understanding on the part of the Israeli officials when it comes to new attacks on Iran? Do they have any sort of assessment internally that what would be the main objective if they can achieve that? And what would be the outcome for Israel in terms of the new missiles coming into Israel and maybe destroying other sites, military and intelligence sites?
I haven't been able to parse through the comments by Israeli officials to understand what they expect to achieve. It appears to me that there's still a delusional thinking among the Israeli political leadership that regime change can be achieved in Iran. And this is something we've also reported on. We republished a piece by Jack Paulson exposing the fact that Mossad is increasing its online recruitment efforts of Iranians in the diaspora, especially in Germany, promising lots of lucrative payouts and opportunities to get their family out of Iran and to relocate them, to subsidize their housing if they can provide information on sensitive Iranian facilities, especially nuclear facilities. And so they're specifically recruiting Iranians in the diaspora, but also inside Iran, who work in these facilities. And weirdly, the Mossad is running these ads, this ad campaign through an LLC in Atlanta, Georgia, which is registered to an influencer, a comedian influencer named Desi Banks. I wonder what he has to say about this. We couldn't reach him. But the point is, they're still trying to degrade Iran's scientific know-how, its nuclear industry. That remains the main target for Israel. It's sort of consistent with their general strategy of mowing the lawn, where they try to, it's a disgusting phrase that Israel conceived during its siege of Gaza, where they, without achieving regime change or destroying the enemy, are able to weaken it through continuous warfare and various operations that might just last a few days, but it sets the enemy back. And so that's one thing I know they are seeking, but I've seen Israeli leadership say what we're actually seeking is to harm Iran to the point to replicate their success in Lebanon against Hezbollah, get Iran to stand down, weakened in a ceasefire, and then wage what they call wars between wars, where they degrade targets without any retaliation by Iran because Iran has been so severely weakened. That's delusional. Iran is not Lebanon. Iranian deterrence is much stronger than Hezbollah's, and they're also not located directly on Israel's doorstep. And the other aspect is the political failure of the 12-day war by Israel. Israel united the Iranian public around the flag, including large sectors of the public that has issues with the Islamic Republic, with the revolution, because of the amount of civilian casualties Israel caused, because they attacked Iranians in areas that are bastions of opposition or criticism to the Islamic Republic, like Tajrish and North Tehran, just setting off Mossad car bombs. The Mossad death squads that Israel had armed and trained inside Iran were just widely seen as terrorists and hated. The bombing of the Evin prison gateway completely backfired and killed families visiting their loved ones inside the prison, as well as social workers. So it was a total backfire by Israel. So I think if the leadership, the military intelligence apparatus in Israel is rational, which they probably are not, they'll dispense of the fantasy of regime change. But I think they exist in their own bubble, And the political dimension is also pushing Israel to war, which is Netanyahu's own survival and just the sheer fanaticism of the Jewish Israeli public.
The Trump administration, when it came to power, has decided to go after Yemenis, Houthis. They said that this time going to be different. We're going to make them, feel how powerful the United States is. They went there, and after all, they have decided to withdraw from the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandab, and that region. Do you think the same curves goes to the conflict between the United States and Iran? How do they feel? Do they feel differently, or they have learned something from the first phase of the war between the United States, between Israel and Iran, and then United States interfered? What is the point? Do you think that there are some people in the administration that they feel that they can defeat Iran, or they feel the same way that it was in the Bab el-Mandab, in the Red Sea? That's not going to work. We're not going to go in that direction.
I think the faction in the White House that believes it can defeat Iran was seated in the Knesset, or the figures were seated in the Knesset, one of them right in front of Miriam Adelson. And that was John Ratcliffe, who we identified based on comments from a Trump administration official at the Gray Zone as Mossad stenographer, someone who had convinced Trump that Iran was on the verge of producing nuclear warheads and actually even distributing nuclear warheads to Yemen's Ansar Allah, another WMD hoax. John Ratcliffe is essentially unqualified for any intelligence position, even in the House of Representatives. He was a backbencher and a small town lawyer from suburban Dallas. He represented a town of like 7,000 people outside Dallas, and now he's risen to the head of the CIA. And a lot of it has to do with backing from AIPAC as Israeli intelligence, and they essentially control his thinking, while the lesser known officials in the CIA make him feel important and manipulate him in their own way. So what was he doing seated in front of Miriam Adelson? It was because he's so friendly and so close with the Israelis and played such a seminal role in getting to the point where Israel felt like it could start a war unprovoked against Iran, and that the US would rescue it from the consequences of the war it launched but could not finish. And there are other figures in the administration. The former CENTCOM chief, Michael Kurilla, was another figure that Israel loved. They called him Israel's favorite general. And it's shocking that a foreign country can have that much influence over the top US military, brass, that they could even say that publicly. His replacement, I think his name is Bradley Cooper. He's I can't discern any difference between him and Kurilla. Pete Hegseth, he'll do whatever Donald Trump wants. He's just a Trump loyalist, and he's more concerned with humiliating woke generals for being fat and gay than he is with actual, geopolitics. He's basically a Trump loyalist. Then you have Trump, who's erratic, J.D. Vance, who said he's against war with Iran, and the American public, which is dead set against the war, including most of MAGA, except for Fox News viewers over age 55, because Fox News has become a straight up vehicle for Israel. I think with all of these factions, it's politically perilous for Donald Trump to simply green light another Israeli war. And after this peace spectacle, I think it sets the clock back on an Israeli war. I think the clock was the timeline was set back as well by Israel's self-destructive strike in Qatar, but we still have to expect that another round will come, and Israel assumes that it has a much better chance of drawing the US in now than it will after a potential midterm election in which the Republicans suffer a humiliating defeat and the Democrats take control of the House and possibly even the Senate. So I still would expect somewhat in the near term the Israelis to attempt something. I just don't know what they're actually thinking. And I think we can all assume if they do launch it, it will be more violent and bloodier than the last round, and Israel will suffer a heavier blow, potentially with ballistic missiles and weapons that we hadn't even seen before.
Max, before wrapping up this session, we have a new winner of Nobel Peace Prize, and Maria Corina Machado.
Yeah.
She won. She somehow defeated Donald Trump. She's more important for the establishment than Donald Trump right now.
Yep.
And what is the case of, the case of Venezuela? Because looking at 2021, it was the Russian opposition. 2022, it was Belarusian opposition. 2024, Iranian opposition. And right now, Venezuelan opposition. What do they want from Venezuela? It's all about oil. It's something geopolitical, much beyond that. What's your take on that?
Well, the Nobel Peace Prize now has to be renamed the Nobel War Prize because it is being engineered to give a green light to the U.S. war on Venezuela, a war which is currently underway, in which the United States is carrying out arbitrary extrajudicial executions of unknown Venezuelan citizens, branding them without any process, any legal process, as narco terrorists, killing them on the high seas. Maria Corina Machado has been awarded the Nobel War Prize after she endorsed Donald Trump's war on Venezuela, and after she signed a cooperation document with Netanyahu's Likud party and personally appealed to Benjamin Netanyahu to lead an Israeli invasion of Venezuela. She later, a year later, called on the U.S. to launch a Libya-style military intervention in Venezuela at the same time that I personally witnessed her attempt to take over a Venezuelan military base along with members of the Venezuelan upper-class opposition in Caracas. And this failed, but we can see that Maria Corina Machado represents the most radical faction of the Venezuelan opposition, which has supported sanctions, which, according to the Center for Economic and Policy Research, have killed tens of thousands of Venezuelans, as well as triggering a massive migration wave to the north, to the US-Mexico border, which has fueled the rise of Trump and the nativist anti-immigrant right, when many of those Venezuelans in Donald Trump's second term were deported not back to Venezuela, something that the government of President Nicolas Maduro was allowing and welcoming, but to a torture camp in Nayib Bukele's El Salvador, where they were humiliated. Maria Corina Machado stood not with her countrymen in Venezuela, but with Donald Trump. And this is consistent with Maria Corina Machado's entire career since she first emerged, leading a campaign called La Salida, in which she encouraged Venezuelans to call for regime change against Hugo Chavez and then Nicolas Maduro, which led to violent riots, which killed hundreds of Venezuelans. In La Salida, the parties and the political mechanism behind it was funded by the United States through the National Endowment for Democracy, which has hailed Maria Corina Machado's reception of the Nobel War Prize. Finally, Maria Corina Machado has openly promised that if the U.S. will push ahead with an invasion of Venezuela to place her in Miraflores Palace as the president, that she will hand over Venezuela's oil wealth and mineral wealth to the highest bidder. And it appears pretty clear that a coterie of MAGA billionaires has already assembled to plunder Venezuela, which is why Elon Musk suddenly turned into a pro-regime change fanatic on Venezuela after never having mentioned the issue before when Maria Corina Machado was running for president. So this is an award for war. It validates Donald Trump's illegal extrajudicial executions and the general push to plunder Venezuela's resources through a regime change war. And it totally discredits the Nobel Prize.